Hello and welcome to the ONTIC Connected Intelligence Podcast. I'm Chuck Randolph, ONTIC's Chief Security Officer. Join us as we delve into valuable insights and practical advice that will empower you to navigate the complexities of modern corporate security and risk. We're here to share knowledge from experienced leaders and innovators in the field. All right, get settled and let's dive in. Hector Alvarez is a nationally recognized expert with over 30 years of experience specializing in workplace violence prevention. He served as a security director protecting critical infrastructure, a city police officer, and a professional security consultant. He has assisted hundreds of organizations in creating threat assessment and workplace violence prevention programs. And through his extensive field experience, Hector has responded to thousands of potentially violent incidents and provided litigation support in high profile cases. As a California based consultant, he has contributed to workplace violence prevention standards and is actively preparing organizations for the implementation of Senate Bill 553. Hector, welcome to ONTIC's Connected Intelligence Podcast, my friend.
Thank you, Chuck. Appreciate it. Glad to be here.
Yeah, it's always a mouthful to kind of read those. I'm always happy to get through those, but just says a lot about you and the experience that you bring to bear.
Yeah, it's always interesting to hear it read back to yourself and, sit there quietly being polite while people explain what you've done.
Well, I know you speak a lot and you're called on to speak a lot. Isn't that always the worst thing is when you're like, no, tell us about yourself. And I can always a little bit of like, okay, once we get through that, then I'm happy. But yeah, you're right. It's that
The
first bit
most
of like,
interesting thing that happened recently, one of my announcers, the person who introduced me, asked me what I do for fun. And I was taken back because I hadn't really ever thought, like, what do I do for fun? And I was pretty perplexed and hemmed and hawed for a while because right now I'm doing this work and my wife and I do this together. And so this is our baby. This is what we do. And it forced me to go find something fun to do. Kind of interesting.
and what was that? Spoiler alert.
Uh,
What was it?
Traveling. We're going to go to Rome here in a couple weeks.
Oh, nice. I'm going later this year. So I've been a few times for work, but it will be exciting to be there as a tourist, won't it?
Yeah, no work, just vacation.
And by the way, I understand, my wife is also involved in the industry. So I understand a lot of times that becomes a little bit of your home life too, the discussion of what you're looking at, what you're seeing. So totally get that.
Yeah, it is. We have to balance it. We'll be sitting on the table and something will pop in and we go right into work. But we're navigating it pretty well.
But then there's all the standard conversations that every couple has, who's going to the grocery store? What do you need? What's happening
Exactly.
with the cars, all the other stuff.
Yeah, completely agree.
But I guess that's kind of a great segue. I'm curious about your journey. What led you into the field? Was there an aha moment where you said, this is kind of my thing and what I like to do? I mean, what inspired you to get into this area?
So, right out of high school, I joined the Navy. I was kind of a knucklehead and needed some guidance. And about 2 years in at Moffett, California, our base was attacked by just a disillusioned young man who wanted to take over a plane and fly to Cuba. But he crashed the gates. It was very dramatic. I was on the security side and we're running around. And it just kind of always set with me, like what would cause somebody to go that direction. When I got out of the Navy, I got a job at Dell Computers in Austin, Texas, and they were growing fast and it was changing. And, there was a lot of potential for violence. And I was around a lot of people that were focused on protecting people from violence. And it just stuck, Chuck. It really just stuck. And I started learning the practical side, the work side. And we were big enough. And Michael's team was growing so fast. There were just so many interactions and experiences that I was able to learn in the field. And then it just kind of took from there.
Well, it's interesting that moment that you had in the Navy, and thank you for your service, by the way. And then how that continued to inform you. Can you think of like kind of looking back at that young man who would later get into the expertise in the field you're in? I mean, was there any early lessons learned or pivotal moments beyond the let's call it the Cuba Gate issue that informed you?
What I very became aware of early on was that it was very rare for me that a situation would turn out the way it was presented at me. I had people come to us with, oh my gosh, this is terrible. And we'd start pulling it apart. We start looking at it, and it really wasn't that bad. And then the big cases, the serious ones, the dangerous ones, started out with, "Hey, Hector, do you have a second?" And we'd start sitting down. and then several hours later realized this is a very serious one. So for me, it was that exploration of trying to understand something that we only had bits and pieces to.
Yeah, I
And
love
that
that.
really stuck for me. It was that putting the pieces of the puzzle together for me, I think, was what attracted me to the work.
Yeah, me too. I started out my career as a private investigator, and it was always the allure of solving a complex issue. Because you're right. Yes, my grandma used to say, you can't judge a book by its cover. And those things often that maybe appear to be the most dangerous, maybe are just howlers, where in fact there's somebody over here that's far more insidious, looking at things, scouting, and those hunters are the ones that you really got to worry about. So I, I like that. I especially like the idea of that little shout out to like critical thinking in this space.
I will tell you though that mine was a practical experience journey. It was a lot of work in the field, and as I shifted from Dell to other jobs, not a lot of schooling. I hadn't been a police officer, so when I landed at my final job that I landed for like stayed at for like 15 years, I put myself through school. I put myself through the academy and worked as a police officer as a reserve in parallel. So I probably was not eligible to hold the job that I had when I first started, but I grew into it. The studying, the law enforcement, the ATAP, and understanding, the academic side, the research side.
Well, think about it though. Sometimes when you build that career from the field up, if you will, I've mentored people, I'm sure you have before as well, where you're like, look, you need to go get your paper and catch it up with you. It's not maybe your or my personal, our personal beliefs. It's just a matter of culture and where we are. So, were you capable, or were you just catching up the paper with your own personal expertise?
I tell you what, when I got into my work at the master's level and I really started to understand research and the science behind it, for me, it was really an eye opener because I learned how to learn. And I think just being the practical person, leveraging the experience is useful. But for me personally, when I learned how to learn, it was really an eye opener, and my competency just shot through the roof.
No, you're absolutely right. I had a similar experience. When you get your master's and now you're studying something that maybe if you're getting, let's say, an undergraduate and you're 60% or 40% of something you're interested in, but you kind of got to get through that. When you get to your master's level, you're like 75, 85% down the road. And you're right. Then you really like, I'm really into this. I love this subject. I'm into the research. It is going back to what we said earlier. It is kind of my hobby now. And I love that learning to learn. I mean, have you continued to weaponize that, air quotes there, learning to learn and other things like now I need to go this so you can more rapidly learn a subject?
The more I learn, the more I realize I don't learn. And I really stand on the shoulders of giants and some of the big people in threat assessment, which is really kind of where I work. And I love trying to interpret their studies. And so I'm constantly taking, basic courses, advanced courses. This is constantly evolving. And I still feel like threat assessment, even violent prevention and security, are such a new and evolving domain that I get nervous when I see people presenting the same stuff they presented 10 years ago with no change because the dynamics keep changing. The inputs, the influences keep changing, and we have to keep learning.
Here's a question, just like how much, okay, let's say art and science of threat management. How much is art and how much is science? Realizing we have no data, it's just two people talking on a podcast. But I'm curious, like, what's your Kentucky windage on that? Because I believe there is both to it.
It's both. I still strongly believe it's a little bit of art, a little bit of science, because I've had situations with very limited information and people looking at me like, "What do we do?" And I have to go a little bit off my gut experience and intuition. It's hard to articulate. But it's like I just feel like this is the case that because, or I've had a similar situation, and it's been hard in those cases to articulate where the advice is coming from. And it's that art. I've been there. I've done that, and we leverage the team's opinion to do that. I don't know that we're ever going to get away from that because I think the human psyche, the human behavior is just so unpredictable. And we're really good at understanding it after it happened. When we don't have all the information, I've been here before, but this is what I think, and it's an opinion.
Well, and I mean, look, there is structured analytics, there's structured intelligence and threat management analytics that we can use. But I think you're right. A lot of the art comes from experiences as well, both like dealing with people on the ground, reading reports, understanding, the various, one thing I love if you go to an ATAP conferences, they are chock full of case studies. And I think it's consuming all that stuff, again, learning how to learn that helps in maybe inform and influence, the gut instinct as well.
Completely agree.
How do you draw the line though between art and, hey, oh, okay, now we need to go do some structural analytics on this and determine something?
For me, it's when the case slows down, when there's a little bit of a pause, some stability. I tend to always err on the side of caution. We can make adjustments to the environment. We can do some things with the person concerned with limited information. But when it starts to, I don't want to say stabilize, to slow down, then I think it's time to dig the information out, to look at background and history. What can we find through an OSINT search? What do we know about history? What do we know about the person reporting? So I think there's sometimes a natural, I don't want to say pause, but a delay. And I think it's critical then that we collect the pieces and we make sure everybody's on the same page and everybody has access to the same information.
I mean, look, you hear, and let's, in the security side of things, and I know you heard this when you worked in critical infrastructure and as a police officer and in the Navy, the idea of that common operating picture. We need common operating language, common operating info to get to that. Same thing works in threat assessment, threat management too. I mean, plus you also have I would say you have a strong cultural layer to that because you could be German, I could be French, and we're looking at a threat case one way, but we both have cultural nuances we're going to bring to our approach and how we deal with that as well.
Yeah, there's still a lot of aha moments in even the most professional threat assessment teams I have. And it's just a constant reminder that, slowing down, going through that formal process, you know, dragging out the structured professional judgment tools really help. And there's a time when I've got limited information. The threat seems serious, possibly imminent, and we go based on our best judgment. So I've seen both. I've seen both.
Yeah, makes me think. I want to shift gears to a minute to more organizational. Workplace violence happens. It's terrible, but it's something that many organizations deal with, or they should be thinking about. I mean, what do you think of in terms of if I'm an organization, not coming from a threat management or security background, and I'm asking you, like, hey, Hector, talk to me about common warning signs that might be my blind spot, and what should I be thinking about to be more, I guess, proactive in recognizing the indicators?
Yeah, and I've started to shift kind of professionally on this because what I've started to notice when I get called in, which is usually after a case, that the individuals, the supervisors, the managers, the leadership, recognized at some point that there was a problem, and it's what they did about it. And I think if there's a gap, it's not recognizing the warning signs. I think the gap is between awareness and action. What do we do about it?
Interesting.
Where do we
Interesting.
go with it?
And what is that? I guess I'm trying to purposely put my brain on that I'm the organization, not security or threat management based, but just an organization. Maybe I'm a CLO or HR lead, and I'm asking you to still walk me through that gap between those two.
Absolutely. For me, that gap, and this is my experience. This is one consultant's work out there. But what I see is, a lot of frontline, mid-level managers and supervisors who are promoted because they have the technical capability. And I think very often what's lacking is the ability to sit across from the table and do an intake. They get very specific on, tell me what happened, what do they say, what do they do, and I think that very fact-based intake can have problems. And some of the most critical, serious threats that have been averted that I've been involved in, we had a manager who asked the question differently. Tell me why you felt uncomfortable. Tell me why you felt unsafe, and allow the person to talk and tell their story. And it's the ability for that to come across. And so it's such a very nuanced intake. But I have found that once it gets to the team does a great job of assessing it. I think it's getting it from the person who's reporting it to the person who's doing the intake. And that handoff, I think, is where we have a great opportunity to make some changes.
think you're absolutely right there. I mean, I remember in a previous life, we all went through crucial conversation training. They wanted everybody in the organization to understand it, because I think you're absolutely right. People get promoted because tactically I'm very good. I'm a good engineer. I'm a good marketer. I'm a good scientist, whatever, insert here. But now as a manager, there's new things that get thrown onto my plate. Yes, of course, we know you can do what you do tactically, but now you have to manage 10, 20, 50 other people. And in that, it requires that you have active listening skills. You can ask open-ended questions to kind of get the read on the other person, all those things. Um, so I guess if I could take that one step further, I mean, if we identified some of the warning signs, like we were able to go out to these folks and get them the training, crucial conversation type training and all that.
No, no,
You,
what I've been struggling with, if any of us Google, workplace violence warning signs, we get, these 30-item list of behaviors to watch out for. And what I've started to see is these lists have become so inclusive that they're almost difficult to use. Because I woke up grumpy. I take change difficultly. I'm narcissistic. I got fired. I got hired. I got married. I got divorced. And when I'm presenting and talking to people, they're just overwhelmed. And what one of the things I say when people ask me, Hector, when should I share my concerns? What I always tell them is, if you find yourself wondering whether or not you should say something, you should probably say something because you've already filtered out all the other situations that just don't bother you.
and that's kind of what I was getting at, is we have the idea of the science. Like, here's your list, manager. Go look at it. They check five of these off, but if you're not listening and you're not bringing the art back into the conversation, you could either miss something or you could misinterpret something. So, I mean, absolutely. Maybe the way to address them effectively is through training and through development of the art of the manager, and that as that first line leader of recognizing something's off. I don't know what it is, but something's off. Maybe I need to go validate or invalidate my thought
Agree.
with
And then I
with
think
the
there's
team.
there's part two. I think once we look at it and it comes to us, then I think the team can look at the specific behavior. Where does it fall in the category? Is there a cluster of concerning behavior? But I don't need my manager to know that. I don't need my frontline supervisor to necessarily know that. I just need them to knock on the door and raise their concern.
Hey everyone, Chuck here. This is a great discussion. Check out similar topics in other episodes linked below. Feel free to explore additional resources. Share your thoughts. Let's continue the conversation. How do you help people get through this balance of, like, look, we're not big brother, but you kind of have to see something, say something, loose lips sink ships, but loose lips also, identify a pattern, or maybe save somebody's life or help somebody get out of a bad spot. I mean, how do you balance those two?
Yeah. So for me, a lot of my clients are private corporations, not very very specific in regulatory compliance. And so I try to stay away from words like report your concerns. And I try to highlight an environment of sharing your concerns because collectively we will all want to work in a certain type of environment. And I highlight not just the benefit of bringing a concern forward because you're worried about violence, but you may just have a coworker who's struggling, emotionally, mentally, and sharing your concerns could address individuals who are having problems that with just a little bit of input could get back on path to their mental or to their wellness. Just get back to wellness. And I'm really trying to stay away from creating this culture of reporting and create a culture of sharing your concerns. Subtle
Well, I
difference.
like that. I mean, it's about care. It's about care and feeding of your fellow employee also. I mean, maybe that's the way to lead, is like, look, you're not tattling on someone. You actually could be saving them. You could be doing something that's going to help them, future on, from doing something harm, like suicide or an active shooting, or whatever threat that might be.
Yeah, in the classes I give, one of the scenarios I present is you walk into a break room and you see one of your coworkers kind of head down crying, and what would you do? And it's really surprising how many people say, "Well, I would give them their space and walk out." And when I explore that, it's a nervousness to engage.
Yeah,
But
I don't want to be involved.
I don't want to be involved. And I think we have to get past that. I mean, if we're going to, a lot of us spend as much time with our coworkers as we do with our family. We can tell when there's a difference. We can tell there's a problem. And I think we have to be able to talk to each other.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I mean, it's fostering a culture of safety and trust. I mean, trust, security runs on trust, both cyber and physical, but at the same sense, I mean, trust between you and your fellow worker, trust that the process is going to work. There's a lot of, I mean, most organizations probably have trust issues. Let's be honest.
A lot of organizations focus on psychological safety, creating this environment where employee feels comfortable coming forward. What I've been hearing a lot more is this concept of organizational betrayal, where the employees just don't feel like somebody's going to do something. I've said something before, nothing changed. Why should I come forward? And once their opinion gets tainted, it's a really hard journey to recover from that. And I'm hearing that more and more from employees. They're like, they will stop me mid presentation. Hector, that's great, but nothing ever changes. We've got to address that.
Well, and now, I mean, let's take Senate Bill 553 to California. I mean, now you have the government, state governments getting involved saying, well, thou shalt do these things. So things that maybe we were ill prepared or unwilling to do, now the government is going to step in and say, these are things you're going to do to protect your employees. I mean, what's your take on, now that we've gotten through the initial phase of 553? I mean, what's your thoughts as we move forward?
So we've seen a lot of blowback from 553. It's directed, and what a lot of people don't understand is the Senate bill passed a law that directed our California's health organization to follow that law while they develop their own standard. And Cal OSHA has done that, and it's going out. And it's been a mix as I've been approached, or I approach people to help out. Some who just want to be compliant. Hector, just tell me what I need to do just to meet the minimum requirements. Others who've already been embracing a culture of safety, a culture of prevention, and it's super easy. But we are already seeing the shift in Cal OSHA, the shift in the bill. And I have a real nervousness for companies that focus on compliance, period, versus a culture of prevention, that it's just not going to work out. Kalosha is really, really focused because of the people that were hurt that motivated the creation of 553, and we're seeing the impact. It's going to be a rapidly changing landscape in California.
Rapidly changing because you're going to see the embrace culture vice minimum viable product to get it done.
That, and the Senate bill created a new definition for workplace violence in California that exists no place else, which also includes behavior that could lead to psychological trauma and or stress. There's no other definition of workplace violence that includes
Very
that. So it's
broad.
it's lowered the bar. It's made it very broad. Um, Kalosha is trying to understand and get their arms wrapped around it because they want to treat it like a health and safety hazard, a hole that's too deep that may collapse, temperature that's too high. The challenge is there's no bright line with workplace violence and what may be a threat, and so that has created a definition problem. I'm going to kick your butt after work. Very clearly a defined threat, maybe not serious. But a statement like, watch yourself, buddy, could be much more of a serious threat, but not necessarily in content.
Well, definitely some unanticipated consequences or unanticipated actions from a law that's out there to try to probably get its arms around something that's no one's tried before. I mean,
And I'll tell you, Chuck, it covers a lot of the bases. It's got a lot of good elements. I think the things that organizations need to understand are the four categories of violence, which explain offender behavior and how that may affect them. It's got to be individualized. It's got to be customized. I worked with a major warehouse company. They just deliver stuff, and I worked with a small mom and pop restaurant. Their exposures are uniquely different, and they need to interpret them differently.
that's interesting because that's like my obvious next question is I'm where am I in the paradigm of this and how should I start? Like you said, there's some companies that have already based that, like employee culture. This is not a new thing. We're happy to do it and help. And there's others like, just tell me what I need to do. I mean, how do you like that's two very vast differences. I mean, how do you advise the ones that don't care, just give me the checklist, as opposed to the ones that like, this is great, give me more?
Yeah. So there's some administrative stuff. The bill definitely creates a requirement to document more than you ever did. And so if you don't have a focus on that, you got to get ready because things have to be captured. But the probably the greatest area of focus I've been giving my clients, other people that I work with, is understand the topography of violence, those four categories of violence, which is based on the offender. So then you can understand your employee's exposure to each one. We can't just mitigate, this. We can't just put up a solution. People ask about ballistic barriers and locks and gates and guns. But you have to understand the threat to then apply a mitigation. And so if you just start applying mitigation tools, strategies, but you don't understand the threat, you may be wasting money, right? And so I really come back to a lot, understand and learn those four categories of violence.
And do you advise people in terms of a strategy like the old standard, people, process, technology? I mean, and if you want to wrap your head around something like, here, let's start with this PPT, people, process, technology, and how those four categories, you could almost make a grid and say, let's walk through the strategy for each of these.
And yes, because a lot of people that have cameras and they don't know what they're using them for, what they're looking at, what they're recorded. We'll have people that have access control systems, card readers, and they're not monitored, they're not checked. They don't understand how what they have is intended to be used and it's not being utilized properly. And so sometimes it's just helping them understand what they've got. But then again, I'll have a 12-person bike shop that's like, Hector, what the heck does this mean? So there's going to be a learning curve for a while. I think if you have any, mid to large size company, it's really making sure that you're focusing on prevention and intervention, not just compliance. Because the big thing that Cal OSHA pushes, and it's splattered throughout the entire document, is effective program. Cal OSHA put out a template for compliance, and at the very end it says, "Hey, following all the steps in this template does not guarantee that you're going to be in compliance. You got to do the lifting on your own." That's a big cautionary tale.
And how do you see like technology fitting into all that? I mean, clearly I can see some easy things that it could be something as simple as this spreadsheet where people have never used it before, or reporting to, something as big as a system of record.
Yeah, I think technology is going to have a huge role to play in then how it's applied because there's just so much data, and we have to be able to sort the information that's available. Going back to that simple thing of just access control systems, a lot of people don't monitor it, and they don't know if they've had a forced entry attempt. They don't know if they have a lost or stolen badge attempting to scan in. And we'll go do a check, like run a report, like, oh, look, this lost badge tried to get in last Saturday at 2 o'clock in the warehouse, and nobody was alerted. So I think there's a huge role to be played for technology, whether it's video analytics, whether it's processing data, whether it's employees interact with each other. But I think there's just too much information for a human being to make that initial pass. And I think that marrying of what I see and what I hear and what I'm dealing with is a great place for technology to help fill the gap.
Yeah, let me ask you another question. It just occurred to me. I mean, behavioral threat assessment teams, you big or small organization. Hey, Hector, calling you on the phone. I'm interested in this BTAT type, threat assessment team. Like, but I don't know where. Like, what does this mean? How should I start? How do I get everybody together? I realize like this could be a podcast in and of itself. I mean, I'm a fan of that approach. I mean, how do you kind of coach people who have never had a BTAT philosophy to kind of like, think people, process, technology, like, which could lead to other great things like insider risk committees and all things. But where do we start getting the team together?
One of the gut check questions I asked him is, do you guys trust each other? Does HR trust security enough to call them ahead of time for a situation that's developing? Or do they wait until an hour before the separation or termination and say, I need security to stand by?
The latter.
It's the latter, is what we get a lot of times. And it's really hard for my security folks to provide any material benefit without being able to do the research. So it's really a gut check question. Do you really trust each other? Because once we get past the structured professional judgment tools, the any analytics, I've got to sit across from a person and have a very raw, in-depth conversation about our
And
employees, and I got to
likely
trust you.
uncomfortable. Yeah, likely
Uncomfortable,
uncomfortable.
likely uncomfortable. So for me personally, one consultant, do you trust each other in this process? And then we can build all the other steps that we know that exist. There's a structured process. There's other people that have done this before. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. It's just what works for us. But it's really hard to do if you honestly, legitimately don't trust each other.
Well, and think about it from like a, larger organizations. I worked at a multinational. A lot of that was pre-built in when I got there. And even then, one of the biggest, not problems, but a hurdle that we always faced was just like bringing everyone to the table when there was a risk that we needed to talk about. Now, I think there's opportunities for smaller organizations to take the BTAT mentality and just say, look, we're going to start a security or risk governance hub in our organization that could be all things. We think that Chuck Randolph is an insider issue. We'll bring it to this group. We think that Hector is showing signs of, some a mental breakdown, if you will. So we'll bring it to this team and getting them all to talk like security people. Sometimes we forget, like we talk first responder or we talk security, and HR talks HR, legal talks legal, finance talks budget. And then you're right. At the end of the day, I don't grok what you're saying, and it makes me feel weird, so I'll just clam up. I mean, I got to imagine as a consultant, that's the first hurdle you get is like y'all need to talk.
Yeah. And a lot of times I'll get called in just to deliver a message that they didn't want to hear internally. Like, I just need you to come in and basically, it sounds, tell them the same thing I said, but they want to hear it externally.
Bring your
Other,
briefcase.
yep, exactly. Look official. Other times, I find myself reminding people to stay in their own swim lanes because they will start assuming what the other person's going to do or say, either HR, legal, security, and the whole idea, and it's batted around so quickly. This whole multidisciplinary approach, it's because I need the security opinion to contradict, to be in conflict with the HR opinion, and they work through that, and the product, I believe, becomes better.
That's interesting. I love it, and I love the multidisciplinary approach too, because for many organizations who can't have like separate councils or committees or working groups or whatever for specific risks in, say, insider or workplace violence. I mean, you can create one. It's probably not optimal, but it's a place to start. Interesting, interesting. Well, I've got one more question that we ask everybody, which is, what does connected intelligence mean to you?
So for me, I started out just a security person, and information would come to me, and I would figure it out, and I'd have a spreadsheet on my own. When I start looking at connected intelligence, and realizing that information can come from so many different places, and the ability for it to be presented in a way that we can all understand at the same time, is made a big shift for me and what I'm seeing. And so I think it's understand that it doesn't have to be expensive, that there's systems that exist, but that it is a big part of it. There's simply too much information, I believe personally, for a human being to sort through, and tying that together with whatever you think technology is and however that applies makes a massive difference organizationally. I mean, the longest I've ever dealt with a case has been 10 years from the time the individual left until the time they came back and started doing something. He was off our radar. Nobody was thinking about him, but we had the databases, the systems, and one name in popped up. Hey, by the way, this is that guy from that time at the place, and we were to catch up. Chuck, I think it make a huge difference as we learn to understand and apply it.
Oh, I mean, 10 years, can you imagine? Like that, I mean, that could have been three iterations of threat managers or investigators or somebody or HR officials dealing with that.
There was only
And the
one person.
continuity. Yeah.
There was only one person left of the organization who remembered him, and that was only
Oh, wow.
after looking at the systems. Everybody else had moved on.
That kind of sent a shiver down my spine
It was
for the
it was pretty
potential.
serious.
Like, yeah, absolutely. I appreciate that. And I like the idea of like connected intelligence as a strategy, as a philosophical strategy for your organization, and start wherever you can start.
Wherever you start.
I Hector, where do people find you? I mean, if they want to find you, are you best to get in touch with you on LinkedIn or what?
Yeah, I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. I don't sell anything. Just show up, Hector Alvarez, and you'll find me. I do a lot of presentations. You know, people ask for me to come share my opinion. You can tell I'm not afraid to share my opinion. But I think LinkedIn is probably the easiest way to find me. You know, I've got a little company and we're plugging away. We've got a handful of people. But I think, like you know, we're trying to keep people safe, and there's just a lot of people rolling the same direction. So don't hesitate to reach out.
Yeah, I love it. And I love all you do to, serve the country, serve your community, and continue to serve organizations to keep them
Thank
safe.
you. You guys
So,
do amazing stuff too.
absolutely. Hector, thank you for being part of the Connected Intelligence podcast, my friend.
Yeah, Chuck, thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening in. To find more episodes, visit us at ontic.co/podcasts. Don't forget to rate and subscribe on your streaming platform of choice. Know someone who would be a great guest or have questions you'd like us to answer? Email us at podcast@ontic.co. This episode was produced by the mighty AJ McKeon. This is Chuck Randolph. Until next time.